Before I begin, I have a little disclaimer. As I worked on this sermon, I decided upon the topic, you cannot go home again. But then I started remembering, looking at this congregation, the majority of you haven't left maybe 20 miles from where you grew up or were raised. And so just bear with me on this one, please. Have you heard the phrase, you cannot go home again? Maybe you've personally experienced the aforementioned scenario. Maybe you left home to go to school, to take a job or employment opportunity, or just to see the world beyond home. But then you were faced with the decision of whether or not to return home. From where exactly did this expression originate? The writer, Thomas Wolfe, took the title from a conversation with another writer, Ella Winter, who remarked to Wolfe, quote, "Don't you know you can't go home again?" Wolfe then asked Winter for permission to use the phrase as the title of the book he was writing. What exactly does this phrase mean? One possibility, past times which are fondly remembered are irrevocably in the past and cannot be relived. Another possibility is nostalgia causes us to view the past in an overly positive light, and how humans tend to remember people and places from our upbringing in unchanging terms. A third possibility is you cannot recover the past. Due to changes from the passing of time, if you try to go back to a place you remember in the past, it will not be the same as you remember it. Why won't it be the same as you remember it? Home has changed. What you remember might be partly there, but much of it is gone. Not just gone, something else, someone else is in its place. Or you have changed. You cannot see home through the eyes that left home. You can only see a new place from your new self, your new perspective. The main character in Wolfe's book, You Can't Go Home Again, George Weber, realizes, and this is a quote out of the book, you can't go back home to your family, back home to your childhood, back home to a young man's dreams of glory and of fame, back home to places in the country, back home to old forms and systems of things which once seemed everlasting, but which are changing all the time. Back home to the escapes of time and memory, unquote. So it is with Jesus in today's gospel reading. If you look back at the last 4 weeks of gospel readings, we have Jesus accused by his family of, quote, being out of his mind, and the teachers of the law saying he's possessed by Beelzebub. That was from June 9. Jesus using parables to explain the growing of his kingdom with the mustard seed as an example, June 16. Jesus calming the sea in a storm while in a boat with his disciples, June 23. Jesus working miracles in the form of healing Jairus' daughter and the hemorrhaging woman, June 30. It is at this point that Jesus has returned to Nazareth, his hometown. Remember the title, You Can't Go Home Again. Have you heard of a backhanded compliment? If not, it is defined as a remark that seems to be an insult that could also be understood as a compliment. In today's reading, the first 3 verses of the reading could be considered an example of this expression. In verse 2, the listeners, his hometown people, are astonished at his wisdom in reference to the miracles he performed. And they said, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands?" But then in verse 3, They start questioning Jesus' heritage. They say he is just a local man like themselves. He's no better than they are. They refer to his family, his mother, his brothers and sisters, and the fact that he's a carpenter's son, and they take offense at him. There are some biblical commentators that suggest the non-reference to Jesus' father and the mention of the son of Mary as being his questionable birth. In verse 4, Jesus' response to these people is, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household." Here is the tie-in to the idea, you can't go home again. And finishing up with verses 5 and 6, it states that Jesus could do no mighty works there, except he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them, and he marveled because of their unbelief. Maybe an explanation for their unbelief is because it took faith on their part to receive the mighty works. They are so familiar with Jesus, too familiar with Jesus, to have faith that he could do a mighty work there. Remember, this is his hometown and his people who knew him well. But notice that Jesus does not let rejection by his countrymen cause him despair. In the second half of verse 6, Jesus continues on with the business of teaching and ministry in the nearby villages. What are some possible reasons for the townspeople unbelief and following Jesus? One, maybe their pride. They knew him. He did not come out of heaven. He grew up in front of them. Maybe he had grown too big for his own shoes. If he knew his place, he would stop these illusions of grandeur and return to his family, his town, and his job where he belonged. A second possibility, their jealousy. Jesus had grown popular and famous and had a large following. He had escaped the rural town. They wished they could have left and made another life for themselves, but they couldn't. Thirdly, their guilt. The Pharisees and leaders rejected Jesus partially for this reason. These people, too, perhaps were unwilling to admit that Jesus' teachings were true, and they did need to repent. Why should their neighbors accuse them? How dare you teach me? Who do you think you are? Or four, maybe it's a combination of all of these. If you were a member of the town of Nazareth, how would you have reacted to Jesus' return? In your life today, what is your reaction to the life of Jesus? At this point in today's reading, some commentators think that the rest of the reading should be a whole new sermon. Verses 7 through 13 deal with Jesus sending the disciples out into the world. Jesus explains to the disciples the journey he has planned for them. If you get a chance after the service, look at the list of instructions Jesus gives the disciples in verses 8 through 11, and maybe ask how a 21st century journey would compare to that journey. People may ask, why sending out the disciples now? Possible responses: Jesus knew he would not remain in the world forever and needed to raise future gospel workers. 2, Jesus wanted his disciples to learn faith. 3, Jesus knew expanding the kingdom of heaven was the most important work in the world and the only hope for mankind. As mentioned earlier, when speaking about what Jesus had been doing and being accused of, these disciples were with him the whole time. These disciples had seen his successes, his miracles, his healings, And now they had witnessed how Jesus reacted to rejection, so that they would know how to reject and react when faced rejection. This discipleship would take persistent faith in the wisdom of God and great courage. Their belief in Jesus and the road to discipleship was not going to be easy. And so in verse 12, they go out into the world and proclaim people should repent. They cast out many demons and anoint with oil many who are sick and healed them. In 2 weeks, the gospel reading of Mark chapter 6, verse 30, the disciples return and report to Jesus all they've seen and done. Jesus faced failure, but he kept on going. As followers of Jesus, we've been called to faithfully share the message of the gospel, but we must know that it won't always be well received. At times, people will not accept us or our message of Jesus that we proclaim, and we must be prepared for this rejection. We can face failure and keep on going if we have faith, courage, wisdom, and strength that comes with both believing in Jesus and in fellowship with his fellow believers. When Jesus sent the 12 disciples out, he prepared them to handle failure. He constantly prepares us for failure through his word and our faith. The 2 main points of this message are that you may not be well received when you return to a familiar setting, and that you are a disciple of God to spread his word. You are called upon to do the best you can in delivering God's message, regardless of the setting or situation. Good luck.